Welcome, dear friends, to the 5th episode of the Elder Scrolls lore series. Join me today as we journey through the events of the Second Era, an age defined not only by cataclysmic otherworldly incursions and rise of powerful guilds, but also, for the first time in history, the unification of all of Tamriel under one rule. With the conclusion of the 3,000 years of the First Era, the Second Age was officially ushered in by the decree of the Seishi potentate Versudu Shaye, the late Emperor's closest advisor. The new era commemorated the demise of the Imperial Riemann dynasty and the Akaviri potentate's official assumption of stewardship of the Second Empire. Despite the Akaviri somewhat integrating into imperial society, these snake men were not fully trusted by the native population. Certain elements of the imperial armies did not take the potentate's ascension well, and pockets of imperial loyalists started to emerge, loyal to the Riemann dynasty even after Riemann III's death. Additionally, as it so often is the case during times such as these, several states within the empire refused to let a good crisis go to waste, and saw these turbulent times as an opportunity to regain independence, refusing to pay taxes and openly challenging imperial rule. The potentate began persecuting those who opposed his rule across all conquered lands, enforcing martial law and engaging in a series of brutal campaigns to crush all forms of resistance. After almost 3 entire centuries of small-scale conflicts, the unrest would eventually escalate to an all-out war after the potentate issued a decree to disband the private armies of the vassal kingdoms, which they used to resist imperial forces, and sometimes even to raid imperial lands. After 37 bloody years of open war, the potentate was finally able to achieve victory and stabilize the realm, disbanding the provincial standing armies. The cost of the campaigns, however, was immense, resulting in the impoverishment of both the empire and its constituent kingdoms. Somewhat predictably, the harsh post-war environment, as well as lack of armies as a policing force, led to a sharp rise in criminal activity, verging on complete anarchy, once again threatening to plunge the realm into chaos. In an effort to maintain order without the presence of a permanent military force, in the beginning of the 4th century of the Second Era, Versudu Shaye agreed to a proposal from his Akaviri kinsman, Daenerys Ves, known as the Iron, to establish an organization of warriors for hire, whom nobles could employ in the absence of a standing army. The terms of this group would consist of temporary employment, with a percentage of the fees going towards the potentate's government, thus providing a solution for not only the issue of maintaining order in the face of rising banditry, but also to the empty imperial coffers, drained by years of war. Originally consisting exclusively of Akaviri, the organization was named the Sifin, meaning soldiers in the language of the Seishi. Eventually, though, the organization opened its doors to all races of Tamriel and became what is now famously known as the Fighters Guild. The early days of the Second Era also marked the foundation of another major guild that would persist for ages to come, the Mages Guild of Tamriel. Born under the name Trectus, the Mer history would come to know as Vanus Scalarian, the Great Mage, was born to a family of serfs under a cruel but minor nobleman in the Somerset Isles. Running away from home and his oppressive master, young Tractus eventually found his way to the mystic Isle of Artaeum, home to the Sigil Order, a group of monastic wizards where he was taken in and given the name Vanus. At Artaeum, Vanus quickly became the most promising student, both through sheer hard work and an incredible natural talent. Only one would be his equal, a fellow Altmer by the name of Manimarco. Take heed of this name, dear listeners, for it is not the last time that it will sully the pages of history. Their competition eventually grew into rivalry, and soon into outright mutual hatred, as Vanus was appalled by his fellow scholars' usage of necromancy and the dark arts, which were slowly corrupting him. To no avail did Vanus attempt to stop Manimarco, eventually informing the Sigic elders of his foul ways and his experimentation on his fellow students, which led to Manimarco being banished from Artaeum. In retaliation, Manimarco confronted and almost slew Vanus before departing for mainland Tamriel. Galerion, realizing that the necromancer would use this opportunity to amass a following on the mainland, pleaded with the elders for further action, but it was futile. The masters ignored Galerion's warnings about the terror that they were unleashing on the rest of Tamriel, a mistake that Galerion would never forget. After many disagreements with the other Sigics, Vanus too would leave Artaeum to pursue his lifelong dream, to bring magic to the masses. At first, he faced much animosity and mistrust. Magic was reserved for the aristocracy and other intelligentsia, and was not to be shared with the general public. Vanus, himself of common birth, and never forgetting the estates of the cruel lord from whom he escaped, rejected such notions. The idea of mages, sorcerers, and mystics from all walks of life pooling their resources together for the purpose of research and public charity was a revolutionary concept in the early Second Era. But over the years, Galerion would succeed in establishing a fraternity of mages first in Somerset, then eventually spreading across all of Tamriel. To the south of the imperial heartland of Cyrodiil lay the kingdoms of the moon-worshipping, cat-like Khajiit. The exact origin of the feline denizens of the southern areas, known today collectively as Elsewhere, is unknown, but scholars agree that the catfolk inhabited Tamriel long before the arrival of both men and mer. Originally split into 16 kingdoms, after the devastation of the Thracian plague in the previous First Age, the Khajiit entered the Second Era as two opposing kingdoms, the north and the south, the warriors and the merchants, Anequina and Palatine. Even being conquered by the Riemann dynasty and the Second Empire, the two Khajiit kingdoms would not stop their infighting, which, curiously enough, never prevented them from still finding the time to occasionally rebel against the empire at large. The ongoing strife between Anequina and Palatine was finally resolved by the Khajiit themselves. Kirgo of Anequina and Ashita of Palatine married in the year 309 of the Second Era, and combined the two conflicting kingdoms, aware of the political impact, into one, the Elsewhere Confederacy. The reason for the name Elsewhere is subject to debate. Some argue that it comes from the language of the Khajiit, where Leswer means the sands behind the stars, while others insist that it is a reference to the old Khajiiti proverb, "A perfect society is always found elsewhere." In either case, the formation of a single kingdom did not bring peace. Local feudal lords rose up in arms against the unified state, eventually capturing the capital of Anequina. It is only when the Khajiiti spiritual leader, the Main, stepped in to broker peace did the hostilities finally end, and peace was established on the premise of control of elsewhere being shifted between the desert tribes and the city nobles, according to the phases of the moons, Maser and Secunda. It is in the southern Khajiit kingdom of Palatine that the imperial potentate Versidue Shaye established his new residence. With the relations between the empire and elsewhere being strengthened over the years, and to keep an eye on the troublesome province, the potentate and the de facto leader of the empire moved into the royal palace in the Palatine capital of Senchal. It was there that he met his death at the hands of the infamous Morag Tong, just as his predecessor, Emperor Riemann III, had. The Morag Tong, growing prideful after the successful elimination of yet another powerful figure, left its signature on the walls of the palace in the potentate's own blood. Yet another high-profile assassination resulted in sheer panic amongst the ruling class of Tamriel, who realized that they too were at risk from the Tong. Every sovereign gave the cult's elimination his highest priority, and it was viciously suppressed and persecuted in every province of the empire, only retaining the barest presence in his homeland of Morrowind. But it was all too late for Versidue Shaye, the Akaviri who ruled Tamriel for an entire 3 centuries. Speculated to have himself used the Morag Tong to assassinate his predecessor to assume power, he ironically met the exact same fate. Though not much knowledge remains of the Akaviri and the Seishi, his incredibly long life was apparently unusual for a member of his race, and it is suspected that powerful magic was responsible for it. Other sources, however, attribute immortality to all members of the Seishi, claiming them to be vampiric in their nature. Versidue Shaye was succeeded by his son and heir, Savirian Shorak, continuing the line of Akaviri potentates dominating Tamrielic politics. It is around the time of the downfall of the Morag Tong did history first acknowledge another sinister organization operating from the shadows, the so-called Dark Brotherhood, the Guild of Assassins. Guild it is in name only, certainly not being officially recognized and chartered under the Guild Act, like the Fighter or the Stonemason Guild, with its activities being less than legal. Despite this, their business is largely ignored, tolerated even, with a curious tendency of those investigating the group going silent, often permanently. The most popular theory adheres to the Brotherhood originating from the Morag Tong and splitting away for religious reasons. The theory holds that during the persecution following the assassination of the potentate, the Morag Tong appealed to the living gods of the Tribunal, the highest power in Morrowind at that time, to ensure their existence. The Tribunal offered an ultimatum. In exchange for tolerance of their continued existence, the Tong would cease their worship of the Daedric Prince of Mephala, in exchange for the worship of Vivek of the Tribunal. This is where the break is said to have occurred. The Morag Tong agreed and worshipped Vivek, also agreeing to limit their activities to the First Era level of traditional inter-house rivalry within Morrowind, with a large minority of its members apparently objecting to both conditions. Other theories persist also, some saying that Sithis, the primordial god of chaos, spoke to a former member and demanded the formation of a new guild of assassins, a guild which would worship him and not Mephala, and aim to marry business with death to better satisfy the Void's hunger for souls. Another, less glamorous theory suggests that the Brotherhood is in fact an offshoot not of the Tongue, but actually of the Thieves' Guild, originating from the members least burdened by morals that would eventually set up the murder syndicate. Whether it was the Brotherhood or their bitter rivals, the Morag Tongue, that were responsible, history cannot agree. Upholding the now centuries-old imperial tradition, the potentate Severian Shorak, along with all of his heirs, was assassinated. His reign, while not particularly noteworthy, was defined by several key events, namely establishing Orsinium as an official province within the empire, and also reversing one of his father's most infamous decrees, the disbanding of provincial armies. Despite this, the Fighters Guild persisted, having already firmly established itself as an organization of immense worth to society. In any case, the last potentate's demise marked the end of the line of Akaviri rulers of Cyrodiil, and almost immediately brought about the downfall of the empire, starting a period of conflict now known as the Interregnum. The Interregnum was defined by a complete collapse of central authority in the face of the empire, and the following 5 centuries of conflict between racial alliances, small kingdoms and petty states, with Tamriel's provinces reasserting their independence and leaving the empire a mere shadow of its former self, confined to its heartland of Cyrodiil. The newly independent provinces then further descended into chaos, with Skyrim splitting into 2 kingdoms, and Orsinium being again sacked by Breton and Redguard forces, a national pastime at this point for the human races. This was a dark age, with a sharp decline of both the general standard of living as well as much knowledge being lost over the years of wars and destruction. Following the Empire's collapse and the internal strife within the recently independent Skyrim, an area within the Northern Kingdom known as the Reach saw the rise of a war chief under the name of Durkarak, called the Black Drake by some. Skilled with both blade and magic, and exceptionally cunning, Durkarak would unify the disjointed Reachman clans of Western Skyrim with the help of the Tag Droilok, a coven of Daedra-worshipping sorcerers. Having taken control of the Reach and amassing a great army, the Black Drake would turn his gaze to the south, to the weakened province of Cyrodiil. With the help of his pact with the Daedric prince Mehrunes Dagon, Durkarak successfully seized control of Cyrodiil and was crowned emperor, starting a royal line of so-called Longhouse emperors. To his credit, the Black Drake did his best to embrace the imperial culture, marrying into an influential imperial family for the purpose of gaining legitimacy, and raising his son Morikar under the imperial tutelage. Not resting long on his laurels, the Emperor led his horde of Reachmen through Craglorn into the mountains east of the region of Bankarai, invading High Rock and sacking the city of Evermore, before laying siege to the fortified Bankarai garrison. Unable to break the garrison, Durkarak marched south, pillaging and sacking all on his way, eventually reaching the city of Wayrest. Again unsuccessful in taking the city due to the absence of any siege engines, and unable to starve out the defenders due to the lack of ability to blockade the port, the frustrated Durkarak marched westwards into Glenumbra, where he did successfully sack the city of Camlorn, taking it by surprise. Inspired by his own success, The Black Drake set his sights on Daggerfall, the capital of Glenumbra and the largest city in all of High Rock. The long and grueling siege that followed was finally broken when Emeric, the young Earl of Cumberland, executed a flanking attack into the rear of the Reachmen, personally striking down Durkorok in battle. The Reachmen, lacking leadership and attacked from all sides, fled the field of battle. Upon the death of Durkorok, his son Morokar immediately declared himself the new emperor. An ambitious expansionist just like his father, Morokar would direct his conquests north instead of west and invade Skyrim, which also allowed for the maintaining of control of his original homeland of the Reach. Morokar would lead his forces all the way to the western capital of Solitude, where they were ultimately defeated. Morokar himself was gravely wounded in combat and would later succumb to his injuries, leaving the throne to his son Leovic. Leovic, much like his father and grandfather before him, consorted with the Daedric prince Mehrunes Dagon, installing Daedric idols in the throne room and eventually legalizing outright Daedra worship within the empire. Leovic's distasteful decree sparked first outrage within the imperial society, and then outright rebellion. This revolt was led by the Duke of Corol and Count of Kavach, a man called Varen Aquilarius, who was assisted by the head of the Imperial Council Abmer Tharn, who was enraged at Leovic for forcefully marrying his daughter. Leovic appealed to his dark patron for aid, and the Daedric Prince of Destruction supplied the Emperor with his otherworldly forces. Leovic's imperial legions, bolstered by the Reachmen auxiliaries and Daedra, defeated Varen at Fort Ash, but Varen then took command of the Legion of Corol, which enabled him to push the Emperor's armies into the Heartlands. Following Varen's victory, he was joined in his rebellion by the other Colovian estates. With their support, Varen led his forces north, where they captured the city of Bruma, which became the rebellion's primary base. Leowen initially remained under imperial control, but Sai Sahan, a Redguard swordmaster and one of Varen's trusted allies, eventually defeated the imperial defenders and took control of the city. Leovic's reign ended in the year 577 of the Second Era, when Varen Aquilarius and his forces stormed the imperial palace, Varen personally dispatching Leovic at the foot of the Ruby Throne and ending the line of upstart Reachmen emperors. Meanwhile, High Rock too was recovering from the aftermath of the Reachmen aggressors. The city-states of the region, having barely survived the surprise invasion, agreed to a mutual defense pact called the Daggerfall Covenant after the city where the treaty was signed. Emeric, the popular Earl of Cumberland and the man responsible for the defeat of the Reachmen, ascended to the throne of the city of Wayrest after a devastating plague known as the Knahaten Flu wiped out the previous royal family. Emeric would go on to marry Princess Mariah, the daughter of the Redguard king Faharajad. This strengthened diplomatic and trade relations between High Rock and Hammerfell, but it also enraged King Rancer of Shornhelm, whose daughter was promised to Enric. The result was a bloody civil war, where Rancer was utterly crushed by the united forces of High Rock and Hammerfell. They were also joined by the Orcs, in exchange for a guarantee that Orsinium would be re-established as a sovereign territory. The new arrangement of alliances would be officially solidified as the Greater Daggerfall Covenant, and would later aim to conquer Cyrodiil and succeed the Second Empire. In the meantime, the other side of the continent saw the second invasion of Tamriel by forces from Akavir. For reasons unknown, The Akaviri fleet, although originating from the east, bypassed the eastern shores of Vardenfell and Solstein, instead landing near Windhelm in the north of Skyrim. Windhelm was taken completely by surprise and sacked, resulting in the death of its queen, leaving only the twin brothers Fildgor and Yoren as heirs. Yoren sought the aid of the reclusive Greybeards, masters of the Nordic art of the voice, who summoned the mythical king Wulfharth. Together, Yoren and Wulfharth fortified the city of Riften and prepared for a siege. The Akaviri, however, driven by unknown motives, bypassed the town and marched into Stonefalls in western Morrowind. They were opposed by Dark Elf forces, commanded by General Tanval of House Indoril, who staged a fighting retreat, slowly drawing the invaders towards the eastern part of the region. There, on a beach of the Inner Sea, the Dunmeri troops under the command of the living god Almalexia met and held the Akaviri, while Yoren and Wulfharth pursued the invading force, catching them with a surprise pincer attack. Despite the tactically brilliant maneuver, the Akaviri forces held and fought the overextended Nords and Dunmer to a stalemate, until the arrival of the Argonian forces, who, led by visions from the Hist, joined the fight and turned the stalemate into a slaughter. The threat of outside invasions united the three races, who had held great animosity towards each other for centuries, leading to the formation of the Ebonheart Pact, led by Yoren, the recently crowned Skald King of Skyrim. Meanwhile, on Somerset, the Princess Irene, having disappeared some time ago, returned to claim her birthright and assume the position of monarch upon the death of her royal father. Irene spent years traveling through Tamriel and saw firsthand the dire situation on the mainland, as well as the threats menacing the world. Irene felt that it is the duty of the elves to put things right and protect Tamriel from the destructive tendencies of the younger races, men in particular, who the Altmer saw as short-sighted due to their brief lifespans. At the same time, the Bosmer were in the midst of a civil war, and the Khajiit were facing an infectious plague, and they both petitioned the Somerset Isles for aid. Consequently, the Somerset Isles, Valenwood, and elsewhere signed the Eldin Accord and joined their forces, with the Somerset Isles intervention halting the Valenwood rebellion and helping to defeat the Nahatan Flu. Forged in these fires, the first Aldmeri Dominion emerged strong in its unity, entering the world stage as a powerful contender for domination of Tamriel. Back in Cyrodiil, Varan Aquilarius, the upstart count turned emperor, successfully stabilized his new realm. Despite this, he was plagued by thoughts of inadequacy about the legitimacy of his claim to the throne. Varan Aquilarius was not a true emperor, as he was not dragonborn, a mortal blessed by the god Akatosh, such as those of the Riemann dynasty. Believing that only a dragonborn can rightfully take the ruby throne, he formed the Five Companions to find the long-lost Amulet of Kings, after none other than the necromancer Manimarco convinced him that he knew of a ritual that would allow Varan to become dragonborn. Varan set out on his search along with his followers, Sai Sahan, the Redguard Blade Master and captain of the Dragon Guard, half-giant warrior Lyris Titanborn, Imperial Chancellor Abner Tharn, and Manimarco himself. After 2 years of searching, Varan and his companions were finally able to locate the amulet. They gathered at the Temple of the One in the Imperial City and began to perform the ritual that involved linking the Emperor's soul to the soul gem within the amulet and lighting the enchanted dragonfire. It was as Varen was beseeching Akatosh to rightfully grant his claim by making him a dragonborn, did Mannimarco betray the would-be emperor and reveal his true intentions. He was an agent of the Daedric prince Molag Bal, and the ritual was not meant to reignite the dragonfires. Instead, it destroyed the ancient barriers, shielding the mortal world of Mundus from the forces of Oblivion. This event became known as the Soul Burst, and it shook every corner of Tamriel as dark anchors fell from the sky, burying into the ground. Thus, the Daedric Prince of Domination began the Plane Meld, the process of pulling the entire planet of Nirn into his dark realm of Cold Harbor. Varen's companions were scattered. Lyris was captured. Sai Sahan fled with the amulet before too being captured, and Abner Tharn reluctantly joined Mannimarco in order to spy on him. The Temple of the One, where the ritual was held, was turned into a massive sacrificial ground where dozens of souls were harvested and brought to Cold Harbor. As for Varen Aquilarius, he disappeared and was presumed dead by all. He was found near death and with all of his memories lost by the moth priests near their abbey, who assumed him for a beggar and took pity on him, giving him shelter. It was there that he set his eyes on the Elder Scrolls, mysterious artifacts of immense knowledge and power. He began to study and read the scrolls in order to learn the events of Tamriel which have happened and have yet to happen, including his life as emperor and his destiny with the hero known as the Vestige. The Elder Scrolls indeed hold such power that no mortal eyes can view them for long, and Varen soon completely lost his vision, yet gaining otherworldly sight in its stead. Eventually, Mannimarco would discover and capture Varen, burning the abbey to the ground, and sending the blind man into the custody of his master, Molag Bal, who would imprison and torture him. Varen's disappearance left the Ruby Throne empty, a position quickly filled by his widowed wife and Abner Tharn's daughter, Clivia. In reality, of course, it was Mannimarco, the King of Worms, that was the real power behind the throne, converting the Empress Regent to the worship of Molag Bal and manipulating her to expel the Mages Guild from the Imperial City, such that his own cult could operate freely. The tensions between the Daggerfall Covenant, the Ebonheart Pact, and the Aldmeri Dominion, already high due to their competing ideologies, turned to open conflict with the occurrence of the Soulburst, as each faction vied to overthrow the corrupt imperial regime and install their own emperor. This conflict became known as the Three Banners War, as each faction invaded Cyrodiil, which served as the main theater of war. However, they also launched attacks against each other's lands. The war caused enormous damage to Cyrodiil's towns and cities, and countless civilians were displaced and resettled throughout Tamriel. While the war raged across Tamriel, the Imperial City truly became the center of Daedric corruption in Cyrodiil, as Molag Bal's dark anchor opened directly above the White Gold Tower. The Daedric forces would fully take control of the city, allied with Mannimarco's worm cult. Thousands continued to be sacrificed to Baal within the corrupted Temple of the One by the cult, their souls being stolen from them and their shriveled bodies being sent to the Daedric realm of Cold Harbor to eternally serve as slaves. Such was the fate of all those that were sacrificed. All but one. The true identity of the one known simply as the Vestige is lost to time, but this prophesied hero would too be sacrificed and sent to Cold Harbor. There they met one of the Emperor's old companions, the half-giant Lyris Titanborn. The two would join forces in an uprising against the Daedra and use the chaos to seek the man known as the Prophet, imprisoned in an isolated cell. The Prophet, a decrepit old man, was said to be the only one in Coldharbour who knew of a means of escape, and was none other than Varan Aquilarius himself, aged beyond his years by torture at Molag Bal's hands. Lyris, sacrificing herself and taking Varan's place in the cell, allowed the Vestige and the Prophet to escape back to the mortal plane of Mundus, using one of Molag Bal's own dark anchors. The deeds of the legendary Vestige are too many to name here, and perhaps we will return to their exploits another day. Regardless, having escaped Coldharbour, the Vestige and the Prophet would regroup and focus their efforts on reassembling the Emperor's 5 companions in order to resist Mannimarco and his Daedric overlord. They would free both Lyris and Sai Sahan, who would reveal the location of the Amulet of Kings. Joined by Abner Tharn, they would journey to retrieve the amulet to the famous site of Sancre Tor, confronting Mannimarco himself, who intended to use the Amulet of Kings to betray his master and absorb Molag Bal's essence and ascend to godhood. In a climactic battle, the Vestige would defeat the King of Worms, who was dragged to Coldharbour by Molag Bal to face an eternity of torment for his treachery. Defeating Mannimarco, however, did not solve the ongoing Daedric crisis. Vanus Galerian, the founder of the Mages Guild, sought to bring the 3 warring alliances to a truce, such that together they could mount an assault on Coldharbour in order to end the threat of the plane meld. The Vestige, at that point a hero of great renown, acted as the perfect diplomat given their unique position and reputation, and convinced each of the leaders to meet at a neutral, undisputed location to discuss a ceasefire. Having reached an agreement, the alliances, with the help of the Mages and Fighters Guilds, staged an invasion of Coldharbour in a bid to stop the plane meld once and for all. The Vestige joined the invasion and was instrumental in its success, along with the help of another Daedric prince and Molag Bal's enemy, Meridia. Molag Bal himself would be ultimately defeated after the 5 companions' sacrifice, and the god Akatosh himself imbuing the Vestige with his righteous fury. The Prince of Domination would be vanquished, and the Vestige's soul would be reclaimed, finally putting an end to the plane meld and the Daedric claim to the mortal world. The years following the defeat of Molag Bal saw Tamriel return to chaos, as various factions and would-be monarchs strove for control of Cyrodiil's capital and the re-establishment of the empire as the period of interregnum continued. No petty king was able to hold the White Gold Tower for any meaningful period of time, that is, not until the year of 852 of the Second Era, when the Calovian king of Falkreath, Cuchulainn, began his campaign to unify the disjointed Calovian estates with the assistance of one Hjalti Earlybeard. As is often the case with such legendary figures, little is known of Hjalti's early life, and what is known is a matter of great debate. Various myths exist as to his origin. Some claim he was born a Nord on Atmora. However, most historians agree that the continent by then was a frozen wasteland, unable to support life. Others say Hjalti was born on the island of Alcair in High Rock, making him of Breton origin. In either case, Hjalti joined and rose through the ranks of Cuchulainn's army to become his most trusted and capable general. Before Cuchulainn could march south into Cyrodiil and lay claim to the throne, he needed to secure his northern borders to avoid an attack from the rear by the troublesome Reachmen. Falkreath's armies under General Hjalti began a campaign to pacify the region, eventually driving the tribes inhabiting southern Skyrim to the ancient stronghold of Old Harolden. According to legend, the general approached the walls alone and brought them down with ease, using the power of the voice, or the Thuum as it is otherwise called. With the walls fallen, his soldiers stormed and overran the fortifications. It is this battle that gave the legendary figure of Hjalti the first of his many names, Talos, meaning Stormcrown in the ancient language of the Elnove. The Breton and Nordic nobles rightfully began to grow fearful of the upstart Falkreath king. Forging an uneasy alliance, the joint armies of Skyrim and High Rock took control of the mountain passes in the Gerald Mountains, as well as the holy fortress of Sancre Tor, blocking Cúlaiceann's road south. Once again, General Talos used his brilliant tactical mind to defeat the enemy forces and capture their leadership. The Jarls of Skyrim, upon hearing Talos's Thuum, recognized him as a son of Skyrim and heir to the Empire of Men, swearing their allegiance to his cause. It was also in the ruins of Sancre Tor that Talos found the long-lost Amulet of Kings, the symbol of imperial power. With his borders secured, it was not long before Cúlaiceann was able to unify the rest of the Colovian estates under his rule, before conquering all of Cyrodiil and eventually the imperial city itself. However, right before he could be named the Emperor of Cyrodiil, Cúlaiceann was murdered by an unknown assailant in the year of 854. The historical consensus is that he was assassinated by Nightblades from the Western Reach, who set fire to the imperial palace. Yet others claim that his death was the result of a conspiracy by General Talos, who then blamed it on his enemies. Regardless, Talos emerged from the fire, one hand on his slit throat and with Cúlaiceann's crown in the other, and although he survived, the general lost the ability to use the Thuum due to his injury. Talos subsequently donned the imperial crown and took the Cyrodiilic name Tiber Septim as the first true emperor of the Third Empire. Following his crowning, Tiber Septim, along with his battle mage Zuran Arctis, set about pursuing his ultimate goal, conquering and ruling all of Tamriel under his banner. With Skyrim and High Rock being already incorporated into the Empire following Septim's previous victories, the only human kingdom left standing was Hammerfell. High King Thasad II of Hammerfell staunchly opposed all imperial attempts at invasion. However, following his death in the year of 862 of the Second Era, Hammerfell's strength faltered, not due to foreign aggression, but because of an internal uprising. A civil war erupted between the two dominant factions in Hammerfell, the rebellious Forebears and the Crowns, who remained loyal to the Saad's son and heir, Prince Ator. After suffering early defeats, the Forebears forged an alliance with the Empire, offering minor territorial concessions in return for military support. Despite their diminished strength, the Crowns fiercely resisted the combined Imperial and Forebear forces, until they were finally besieged and defeated at Stras Mackay in the year of 864. Later that same year, an uprising led by siblings Cyrus and Isara stormed the imperial palace, and the provisional imperial government was destroyed, leading to a peace being signed on more favorable terms for the Redguards. Not wishing to repeat the mistakes of his predecessors and launch costly campaigns into the savage inner swamps of Black Marsh, Tiber Septim avoided a full-scale invasion of the province. The outer borders, however, fell quickly to the imperial armies. Elsewhere, too, fell under the emperor's relentless legions, after a siege of the city of Senchal so brutal that it was struck from imperial records. Having subdued the beast folk, Talos turned his gaze on the only province to never have been incorporated into the previous two iterations of the Empire, the volcanic lands of Morrowind. Septon, despite the advice of the legendary spirit of King Wolfhearth, was hesitant of invading at first, being aware of the divine power of the tribunal, the living Dunmare god kings. However, he coveted the rich source of ebony located in the province, as he needed a source of capital to rebuild Cyrodiil, which had been ravaged by the previous 400 years of war during the interregnum. Ultimately, the practical need for the ebony and the dream of a fully united Tamriel won out, and Tiber sent his legions into the land of the Dark Elves. The brief but costly campaign culminated in the siege of the Morrowind capital of Mournhold, which the Imperial forces took and then sacked. Both parties were reaching a breaking point, with the Imperials exhausted after facing the might of the living gods, and the Tribunal, in turn, were losing their power, with the return of Dagoth-Ur, thought by all to be dead since the previous era, who cut them off from the source of their divine energy. Thus, Vivec and Tiber Septon signed the Armistice, a treaty that gave Morrowind near full autonomy, a right no other province possessed, in exchange for provincial status in the Empire. Additionally, Vivec gifted Tiber Septim the all-powerful Golan of Dwemer construction, Binomidium, per terms of the treaty. Despite Valenwood on the mainland quickly falling to the Imperial forces, the heart of the Aldmeri Dominion, the Somerset Isles, were determined to resist the so-called Taints of Humanity on their sacred island of Alinor. While the Aldmeri were no match for the might of the legions on open ground, at sea the Imperial Navy was completely outclassed by the generational seafaring knowledge of the High Elves, and the Dominion even allegedly allied with their ancient rivals, the Malmer, sea elves from the southern archipelago of Piandonia, to oppose the expanding empire. This all changed after Tiber acquired the Numidium from the Vec, as per the terms of the armistice. The mechanical colossus was constructed in the previous era by the infamous Dwemer Kagrenak, and was intended to retake Morrowind from the Chimera and become a new god. In practice, the Numidium was a weapon of mass destruction, and after learning of Numidium's true power, Tiber realized it was the key to his completing the conquest of Tamriel. The only issue he faced was the lack of a power source, as its original power supply, the Heart of Lorcan, was being carefully guarded by the reawakened Dagoth-Ur under the Red Mountain. Talos sent his court battle mage, Zuran Arctis, to study the golem, and tasked him with finding a potential replacement for the heart. What followed is a topic much debated by the academic community. Arctis successfully devised a new power source, a massive soul gem called the Mantella. The gem required the life force, or heart, of a powerful being, and it is unclear what, or rather who exactly powered it. The prevailing theory is that Zuran himself willingly gave his soul, while others claim that the spirit of the mythical King Wolfheart was betrayed and trapped within the gem. Some even say that it was Tiber himself that gave his heart to awaken the Numidium. In any case, Tiber Septim used the Numidium to besiege and absolutely crush the capital of the Altmer, with Eleanor's fall marking the end of the 44 years of the so-called Tiber War, finally uniting all of Tamriel under one rule for the first time in Nirn's history. In the aftermath of the war, Tiber Septim would set about solidifying his control over the newly formed empire. He used the Numidium to destroy any remaining neutral royal families, such that he could enthrone those loyal to him. Zuran Arctis, horrified at this abuse of power, attempted to put a stop to it by reclaiming his heart from the mechanical horror. In the ensuing battle, both the battle mage and the construct were destroyed, and the heart that they shared was blown out of reality and into Aetherius. With the soul within the gem of Mantella lost, Arctis couldn't die a true death, and was left in a semi-slumber state in a subterranean vault, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim his heart. In this undead incarnation, Zuran Arctis became known as the Underking, and from time to time sent out his forces to search for the Mantella. Despite this, with his goals accomplished, Tiber Septim would crown himself as the first ruler of a unified Tamriel, and thus the Third Empire was truly born. He declared the end of what he called the Age of Chaos in the year of 896, and the beginning of a new Third Era. Thank you, dear friends, for joining me on this turbulent journey through the pages of Second Era history, and until we meet again.